When you think about the world's biggest cocaine markets, what countries come to mind? Colombia, obviously. That's where it's made. The United States, 330 million people, decades of demand. Mexico, the UK, maybe Spain. Perhaps Brazil. You almost certainly did not think Australia. And yet, according to the United Nations World Drug Report 2025, that's exactly what the data shows. Australia and New Zealand are the highest per capita cocaine consumers on the entire planet, not by a small margin, nearly double the United States, almost triple the European average. And here's the part that nobody's talking about. The route being used to get cocaine here, right now, as you watch this, involves custom-built submarines sailing more than 10,000 miles under the Pacific Ocean. It involves criminal alliances that were only discovered in the last few months. And it traces back in a very real way to a man who died in Medellin, Colombia in December 1993, a man who never once looked at a map of the South Pacific, a man named Pablo Escobar. This is the story of how his legacy found Australia. Let's start with the numbers because they need to be said clearly. In 2023, 3% of Australians between the ages of 15 and 64 reported using cocaine. 3%. That might not sound dramatic, but compare it to the United States at 1.6% and Europe sitting at 1.1%. Australia isn't just ahead of those countries, it's in a completely different category. And this isn't old data or a one-time spike. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission runs one of the most sophisticated drug monitoring programs in the world. They test wastewater, literally analysing sewage, to track exactly how much cocaine is being consumed across the country in real time. Their most recent annual report, covering August 2023 to August 2024, found that cocaine consumption in Australia jumped by 69%. 69% in a single year. That's not a trend, that's an explosion. In total, Australians consumed an estimated 22.2 tonnes of major illicit drugs in that 12-month period. Methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin and MDMA combined, with a street value of 11.5 billion Australian dollars. And the ACIC's own data modelling suggests this trajectory will continue rising through 2027. The question isn't whether Australia has a cocaine problem. The numbers settle that. The question is, how did this happen? How did a country at the literal bottom of the world, surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean, become the most cocaine-saturated nation on Earth? To answer that, you need to go back to the 1970s. Pablo Escobar didn't invent cocaine, but he industrialized it. Before the Medellin cartel, cocaine was a relatively niche product. What Escobar built, alongside figures like the Ochoa brothers and Carlos Leda, was the world's first truly globalized drug supply chain. They sourced coca paste from Peru and Bolivia, processed it in jungle laboratories in Colombia, and moved it primarily into the United States through networks in Miami and the Caribbean. At its peak, the Medellin cartel was responsible for an estimated 80% of the world's cocaine supply. Escobar himself was worth somewhere around $25 billion. The operation was running what amounts to $100 billion a year in modern terms. But Escobar had a strategic blind spot. He never looked south. He never looked west across the Pacific. Australia in the 1980s was irrelevant to him. Too far, too isolated, too small a market. The logistics alone, getting a kilogram of cocaine from Medellin to Sydney, would have been an extraordinary undertaking for minimal return. So Australia was left alone. When Escobar was shot dead on a rooftop in Medellin on December 2nd, 1993, the cocaine world fragmented. The Cali cartel rose. Then the Mexican cartels consolidated. Then Brazilian criminal organizations grew into global players. And as each of these successor organizations built out their own networks, they all faced the same economic reality. The traditional markets, the United States, Western Europe, were getting saturated. Prices were falling. Law enforcement was getting more sophisticated. They needed new markets. Markets where cocaine was rare, where prices hadn't been suppressed by decades of competition, where wealthy consumers existed but supply didn't. Markets like Australia. Here is the single fact that explains everything that follows. 1 kilogram of cocaine on the US-Mexico border costs roughly $16,000 US. That same kilogram, once it reaches Sydney, sells for up to 240,000 Australian dollars. That's not a markup. That's a different universe of pricing. For a cartel, Australia isn't just an opportunity. It's the most profitable cocaine market in the world by a significant margin. And cartels, whatever else they are profit-maximizing organizations. The problem was always geography. Australia's isolation, which once made it unattractive to traffickers, became both the reason for its premium pricing and the primary obstacle to reaching it. Thousands of miles of remote coastline on one side, thousands of miles of open ocean on every other, and Pacific Island nations between South America and Australia, Tonga, Fiji, the Solomon Islands, with almost no customs enforcement capacity. So the cartels got creative. Over more than a decade, cocaine began flowing through the Pacific on sailing boats, inside shipping containers hidden in commercial freight. Pacific Island nations started appearing in law enforcement reports as transit and repacking points. In 2024, the Australian Federal Police and Border Force seized 48.8 tonnes of illicit drugs in a single financial year, a 44% increase from the year before. And then came something that genuinely stunned even veteran law enforcement analysts: the submarines. In February 2024, Colombian authorities were conducting a search and rescue operation for 2 missing fishermen. What they found instead was an 18-metre semi-submersible vessel loaded with over 4 tonnes of cocaine. Destination: Australia. This was the first time a narco submarine had ever been directly linked to the Trans-Pacific route, but it wasn't the last. In November 2024, a 62-country operation called Operation Orion, described by Colombian President Gustavo Petro as perhaps the largest cocaine seizure in Colombia's history, intercepted 6 semi-submersible vessels in the Pacific. One of them was carrying 5 tons of cocaine and had enough fuel to travel more than 16,000 kilometers. Its destination was Australia. Let that number settle. 16,000 kilometers, non-stop. Under the surface of the Pacific Ocean, Manuel Rodriguez, the head of the Colombian Navy's anti-narcotics unit, was direct about what they'd found. "This is a new route that they have opened for semi-submersibles," he told reporters. It was the 3rd such vessel discovered on this specific route, and Colombian authorities confirmed that the first discovery came with maps on board. Maps that allowed them to identify the full route and begin coordinating with Australian law enforcement. The interception deprived drug cartels of more than $8.4 billion. It revealed, for the first time publicly, previously unknown alliances between criminal organizations from Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, and groups based in Oceania itself. These aren't the old pyramid structure cartels from the Escobar era. As Colombian security officials described it, today's trafficking organizations are complex criminal networks, cooperatives of criminals from different organizations, working together toward a common goal. That goal is Australia. Now here's where this story gets genuinely complicated, because the obvious question is, who is actually buying all of this? The stereotype of cocaine use is probably somewhere between Tony Montana and a 90s Wall Street banker. What the Australian data actually shows is far more mundane, and arguably more unsettling. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, the demographic most likely to report cocaine use in Australia is employed people, not the unemployed, not people in crisis. Working Australians with salaries. People living in the most socioeconomically advantaged neighbourhoods are nearly 4 times more likely to use cocaine than those in the most disadvantaged areas. The ACIC's wastewater analysis confirms what that data suggests. Cocaine use in Australia is concentrated in capital cities, not regional areas. It tracks with disposable income, with Friday nights, with certain professional environments and social scenes. In fact, 58% of Australian cocaine users report using it only once or twice a year. For the majority of users, this isn't addiction, it's a special occasion. A party drug with a price tag that most Australians, earning some of the highest wages in the world after 3 decades without a recession, can actually afford. And at $350 Australian per gram, among the highest prices in the world, the market still has 1 million users a year. That's the economic engine driving everything else in this story, not desperation, prosperity. Which creates an obvious and uncomfortable question. Does a society bear any responsibility for the violence, the corruption of Pacific Island governments, the narco submarines under the ocean, when the driver of all of it is a Friday night line in a nightclub bathroom? I'm not going to answer that for you, but I think it's worth sitting with. What we can say with certainty is this: the cartels are not going to stop.